When we're evaluating the impact of teaching on learning, we need to think about it both from a zoomed out and a zoomed in perspective. In the zoomed out view, we're thinking about the subject as a whole. What are the strengths of that subject? What has gone really well? To what extent have the children developed those ideas around the big concepts? To what extent are we delivering on the national curriculum aims and objectives? To what extent has what we've delivered met the subject leader's vision for that subject? We need to think about the subject in the round, stand back and have a look at the whole picture for that particular subject. We can do this by looking at the national curriculum document for each subject, at the start of which it talks about the purpose of study and the aims for each subject area. So when you look at the national curriculum for modern foreign languages, for example, you can see that this is the purpose of study. We can think about whether or not our subject teaching has brought about a curiosity in pupils, whether it's deepened their understanding of the world. We can think about whether it's developed their reading, writing, speaking and listening skills in a foreign language. We can think about whether or not it's developed that practical use of language and whether or not we've covered any literature. Have we given children the opportunity to tackle authentic sources, to express their ideas, to respond to others? Are we teaching it in a way that gives children a foundation for being able to learn other languages? Directly under the description of the purpose of study in the national curriculum, it sets out the aims for each subject. So, for example, in modern foreign languages, we can see that the aims are for children to speak with increasing confidence, fluency and spontaneity, finding ways of communicating what they want to say, including through discussion and asking questions, and continually improving the accuracy of their pronunciation and intonation. So we can think about, when we consider the big picture of the subject as a whole, are our lessons delivering on these aims? Are children being able to write at varying lengths for different purposes and audience? Are they learning to use a variety of grammatical structures? Are they discovering and developing an appreciation of a range of writing in the language studied? So we step back and we look at the zoomed out picture for all of our lessons in that subject. For convenience, most of the subject leaders have copied and pasted the purpose of study and the aims from the national curriculum document into their progression guidance. But whether you're using the progression guidance or whether you're using it directly from the national curriculum, you need to think about, for each subject, is it delivering on the purpose and the aims? So in history, for example, is the teaching equipping pupils to ask perceptive questions, think critically, weigh evidence, sift arguments, develop perspective and judgments? Is history helping pupils to understand the complexity of people's lives, the process of change and the diversity of societies and relationships between different groups, as well as their own identity and the changes of their time? When we look at all of the history lessons taken together, are they helping children to grasp and understand significant aspects of history? When we think about the sequencing of lessons across the whole of the year, are we helping children to understand a coherent chronological narrative from the earliest days to present day? Are children developing those historical concepts such as continuity and change, cause and consequence, similarities? Are they developing their thinking in that subject discipline? And are they using methods of historical inquiry and gaining historical perspective? We need to think about the history subject in the round. This is what it means to look at it from a zoomed out perspective. Ideally, at the end of each term, before we start planning the next unit of work, we would get together as a group of teachers and consider our teaching of each of our subjects. For example, science. This might be done with or without the science subject leader. We can ask ourselves a number of questions based on the aims and the purpose of study and the progression document, to think about the effectiveness of our teaching and any changes that we want to make to our approach. So for example, in science, we might ask, has the delivery of the curriculum engaged and motivated pupils? Why or why not? There might be something that has really hooked the children in the particular unit that's just been delivered, something that's worked really well and engaged the children. If you can unpick what it was that led to that engagement, then that's something that you can use and think about for future units as ways that have been successful in grabbing children's attention. If something hasn't worked well, what different things could be changed in future units in order to make motivation higher? Has the delivery of the curriculum led to curiosity, excitement in science, and a sense of wonder? Which were the most exciting lessons and why? Why did those lessons really work well? What were the factors and ingredients that went into making that a really successful lesson? Sometimes we spend a lot of time thinking about why lessons haven't worked well, when actually we need to think about the lessons that have worked well. What really made them work so that we can use that to our advantage when we're planning future units of work. To what extent has delivery provided opportunities for pupils to work scientifically? For example, observing over time, noticing patterns, classifying and grouping, conducting comparative and fair tests. Have we provided enough opportunities? Pupils can't become more proficient in these areas if we haven't specifically targeted them. To what extent have we provided opportunities to participate in different types of science inquiry, answer scientific questions, or engage practically? To what extent are pupils being required to explain concepts, articulate their thinking, provide rational explanations, predict how well things will behave? So sometimes we realise when we reflect on the lessons that a particular aspect of science might not be developing at a faster rate as some other elements of science, perhaps because we haven't built in enough opportunities for that type of science to flourish. So perhaps we need to build in more oral activities, more opportunities to actually explain their thinking in order for those aspects to develop. The types of activities that we give children will help or hinder them in accessing some of the aims and objectives of the national curriculum. To what extent have they used skills from other subjects such as mathematics and computing to collect, to analyse, to present and to interpret data? Have pupils developed their understanding of how science has changed lives? Have pupils' knowledge of how science contributes to the world's future prosperity been enriched? Can pupils give examples of real-life science operating in the everyday? So some of these questions might be able to be answered by looking in pupil books. So for example, if the children have created graphs and collected data as part of a unit, you might be able to see that in pupil books. However, aspects of wider science might have been delivered through assembly or through some large-scale practical activity, which perhaps isn't captured in books. In each of the progression guidance documents, subject leaders have set out ideas about the big concepts in their subject. So for example, in geography, the concept of pattern, the concept of diversity, the concept of interconnections in geography. We need to ask ourselves, are these concepts being delivered? Are we emphasising the concepts, and are those concepts growing over time? These are concepts in the subject areas that pupils will need not only now in primary school, but also later on in Key Stage 3, in Key Stage 4 and beyond. In music, are we developing children's understanding of pulse, of dynamics, of rhythm in different topic areas? How are they linking those to composition, to performance and listening, for example? So in the zoomed out perspective, we also need to consider the big concepts as set out by our subject leaders in the progression documents. A zoomed out perspective would also consider the sequence of lessons and how the sequencing has supported the acquisition of knowledge and enabled understanding to be developed. Did you have the right sequence of lessons? What concepts did the pupils find the most difficult? Did they manage to grasp them in the end? Is there anything else that we need to do to shore up that particular concept? Is it a concept we're going to need to come back to in the future, in this year group, in the next year group? Is it on a spiral as part of the science curriculum? What are the next steps for developing thinking in this subject? So we want children to think like historians, think like artists, think like scientists. How has the way that we've delivered lessons aided or detracted from the acquisition of knowledge? So we need to think both about what they had to cover, but also how did we go about it? Was it the most effective and efficient method of learning? Did it engage children? Did it challenge them? Did links between subjects work well, or could they be improved? The intent for the curriculum has been laid out by subject leaders in the progression document and in the national curriculum. That's what has to be delivered. But we also need to, from this zoomed out perspective, consider how effective have we been as a practitioner at delivering what was intended. We need to think about our approach, our design to lessons, the sequencing, all the things that we do in the classroom that has a direct impact on pupils' learning and the success of the curriculum. Try not to just think about teaching in terms of that individual lesson or even an individual unit. Try to think about what the learning experience is like for the child all the way from EYFS to year 6 in that subject. Are we keeping our eye on that long distance goal that we want children to achieve? How are we preparing them for a future where they can excel in geography, in history, in art, in music? What is it in terms of those big concepts and larger skill set that we will need to develop in them in order to be lifelong successful learners in that particular subject? And also to stand back and think about our teaching. What are all the variables involved, all the choices that we make in terms of turning that curriculum document of what has to be delivered into the how of the classroom, into the bubbly liveliness of curiosity in children's minds and exciting lessons that do develop skills and do deliver on the acquisition of knowledge and understanding? How do we get children to real mastery? From time to time, we need to stand back and take an objective and analytical approach to looking at how we are delivering the curriculum and whether or not we're actually achieving the goals that we set out to achieve in our intent statements, in our philosophy in school. Think analytically about the steps that are being taken right now and think about how they will help children to achieve that long-term goal. Keep one eye on the future.